So my name is Zvi Gitelman. I teach at the University of Michigan, and the title of my talk is Jews, Half-Jews, Maybe Jews, Non-Jews from the FSU. You'll see what I'm going to focus on in a minute, but I want to start off with telling you personal experience with three students I've had at the University of Michigan over the past few years. One day I got an email from a student, and she said, I'm a Jewish student from Kazakhstan. I'm here for a year, and I heard that there are Jewish studies at the university, and I'd like to take a course. This was about 10 years ago, and I said, wow, с удовольствием, this is great, somebody from Kazakhstan. And she signed her name, well, I'll change the name, something like Natasha Ginsburg, clearly Jewish. She came to see me in my office, she opened the door, and I said, this is not Natasha Ginsburg. She could have posed for Miss Slavic Beauty Queen 1990. It's politically incorrect, but Russian speakers are politically incorrect, so you'll know what I'm saying, that it was clear that she's not Jewish. So I kind of asked her about her biography, and she said, well, her grandfather came from a small shtetl in Zapadnaya Belarusia, that part of Poland that was taken by the Soviets in 1939. And he was drafted into the Soviet army. He served at the front. He was badly wounded, and he was evacuated to a hospital in Kazakhstan, where a nurse took very good care of him. She was Ukrainian. Eventually, he married her, sort of the usual story. They had a son who chose to be identified, of course, as Ukrainian rather than as Jewish. And he married a Russian woman, and Natasha Ginsburg was officially registered as Russian because her mother was Russian. So we got to talking about various Jewish things, and I invited her to come to Hillel Friday night, like now. She did. She came to our house for Shabbat lunch. And as we got to know each other, she said, you know, I know that according to Jewish law, I'm not Jewish, but look at my name. And I love my grandfather. I just love my grandfather. And we have one shul in Almaty, and he would take me to shul. Of course, there was no place for girls in the shul, but my brothers had a place, and I would stand and watch, and I really loved my grandfather. And he even taught me Yiddish. I said, really, what words do you know in Yiddish? He said, I don't know if it's polite to say, but he used to call me a mamzerke. And of course, mamzer in Hebrew means bastard, but a mamzerke, it's really a positive term because it means a little wise guy, but a cute one, all right? And a few other phrases that she knew in Yiddish. And the last I heard, Natasha went back to Kazakhstan. I think she went into the petroleum business. Is she Jewish? She had a paternal Jewish grandfather. All her friends thought she was Jewish because of her name, and that's it. The second experience was with a student who actually worked as my research assistant for 3 years. She came from Samarkand. She was not Burkhaskaya Yevreika, she was Ashkenazi. She always wore a big Magen David. And one day, we were talking, and she said, you know, my mother's mother was Belarusian. So I heard that Jews won't consider me Jewish, but that's ridiculous. I didn't want to break her heart, but I had to tell her that according to halacha, she would not be Jewish. She got married. I don't know whether her husband is Jewish or not. She went on to law school. She's somewhere in the United States. The third experience was the most peculiar, or at least unusual. In a class that was dealing with Jewish identities, I talked about Judaism privileging matrilineal criteria. That is to say, it's transmitted through the mother's line, not through the father's line, as it is in some other societies, for example, Muslim societies. And a girl came up to me and she said, why is it always girls? I don't know. But anyway, she came up to me and she said, you know, my mother is Jewish and my father is Zoroastrian, which is, of course, a religion that originates in Iran, present-day Iran, but spread to India and other places. Now, according to the Zoroastrian religion, being Zoroastrian is transmitted through the father, and there is no conversion to Zoroastrianism, which is why the number of Zoroastrians in the world is shrinking considerably, because you can't convert to be a Zoroastrian. So she said to me, what am I? I said, you're lucky. According to Jewish law, you're Jewish. According to Zoroastrian law, you're Zoroastrian. So you're both simultaneously. A few weeks later, she comes up to me and she says, you won't believe it. This is a small class, 25 people. She says, there's another one in class. I said, what do you mean another one? A girl from New Jersey like you are? She said, no, a Zoroastrian Jew. I said, come on, there are 3 such people in the world and 2 of them are in my class. Well, the girl who was wearing what I took to be Indian dress came up to me and said, listen, yes, my mother is a Baghdadi Indian Jew, but she's not interested in being Jewish, and we do everything according to the Zoroastrian way. I wear special clothes, and I celebrate all the holidays, and but my mother can't become a Zoroastrian, can't convert. But since I'm the daughter of a father who's Zoroastrian, I'm Zoroastrian. According to Jewish law, this girl is Jewish. So this brought home to me this conundrum, this problem, this issue of, we talk about it a lot these days, mihu Yehudi, who is Jewish, and how do we decide who is Jewish and not? This is a very new question, in some sense. And we see it very clearly in the Soviet case. So in 1900, roughly, there were 5.2 million Jews in the Russian Empire. It was the largest single concentration of Jews in the world. Today, if we take the territory of the Bivshiy Soyuz, then we have maybe 300,000 Jews. So how did we get from 5.2 million to 300,000? The answer is pretty obvious. A lot of it has to do with emigration. Some of it has to do with the murder of more than 2.5 million Jews during the Second World War. But a lot of it also has to do with marriage between Jews and non-Jews. And I'm going to call that by a word, intermarriage, which some people don't like, but I think it's useful for our purposes. And there has been a spectacular rise in that in recent decades, not only among Russian-speaking Jews, but among American Jews and Jews outside of Israel in general. Moreover, for Israel, we have an additional twist, which is that about 340,000 people who make no claim to be Jewish have come from the former Soviet Union to Israel as immigrants, are Israeli citizens, but are not Jews, are not Arabs, are not Muslim, and in most cases are not practicing Christians. 340,000 in the United States would be a very small group. In Israel, with a population of 6 to 8 million, it's fairly significant. We don't know how many such people have immigrated to Germany or to the United States, but one can assume that there's a significant number of such people. In Russia itself, in the Rossiyskaya Federatia, the majority of small children labeled by their parents as Jews in the last Russian census have one parent who is not Jewish. So more than half of children who are called Jewish by their parents have a parent, might be father, might be mother, who is not Jewish. In 2001, there were 1,805, точно, 1,805 Jewish children born in Russia. Of the 1,805, 725 had Jewish mothers, which means, if you do the math, 1,100 would not qualify as Jews by the criteria of conservative Judaism and Orthodox Judaism. They might qualify as Jews according to Reform Judaism and its doctrine of patrilineal descent, which we'll talk about in a minute. So what I'm going to try to do is show how the meanings of being Jewish have evolved over history, and then raise three questions. What are the consequences for the Jewish collective, or if you want, community in the former Soviet Union, and the reconstruction of Jewishness in the former Soviet Union, of this very large non-Jewish presence among partly and wholly Jewish families? One. Secondly, what difference, if any, does the presence of large numbers of non-Jews among the immigrants make in the United States and Germany? And third, what are the implications for the state of Israel, which calls itself the Jewish state? All right? And Mr. Netanyahu has made a fetish out of having the state acknowledged as a Jewish state. All right? What are the implications of the presence in Israel of so many non-Jews among the 15 or even 20% of the population who are ruskogovorящие, who originate in the Soviet Union? All right? So let's look first at history. The Jews are an anachronism. They're a vestigial organ of ancient times. Why do I say that? Because in ancient times, there is no difference between religion and ethnicity. All religions had their own gods. The Midianites, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Egyptians, and the Ivrim, Israelim, Yehudim. And that's what we call a tribal religion, where ethnicity and religion are not separate. They're the same. In today's world, we have the dominance of universal religions, Christianity and Islam. What do I mean by universal? It means that if I say someone's a Christian, I'm saying absolutely nothing about his or her ethnicity. Could be Japanese, could be Canadian, could be Australian, yeah? Could be Russian, could be Chukchi. And the same for Islam. Islam may be Indonesian, may be African, etc. So religion and ethnicity are separated. Religion is universal. The very word Catholic in Latin means universal, but ethnicity is particular. Not so with the Jews. And that's because the Jews are an ancient people. They first had to face the question in the late 18th century. Following the French Revolution of 1789, the question arose: the Jews are now emancipated. That is to say, they don't have to live in a ghetto. They have full civic equality. They could become full-fledged Frenchmen. But only Frenchmen of the Jewish faith. Because, as the famous statement by the Count of Clermont-Tonnerre made in the National Assembly in France in 1789 went, the Jews should be denied everything as a nation, but granted everything as individuals. They must be citizens, but they can't be a separate political formation or class. The existence of a nation within a nation is unacceptable to our country. So, Jews in France some of them, identified as Israélite. Je suis français, mais Israélite. Not juif. Parce que juif, Jew, is ethnicity. Israélite is faith. Better case, the Germans. Reformed Jews who said, we are deutsche Staatsbürger mosaischen Glaubens. We are German citizens of the Mosaic faith. We are just as German as Helmut over here, who is of the evangelische Glaubens, Protestant, or Martha over here, who is of the katholische Glaubens. We are all Germans. Of course, that rings terribly ironic, because in 1933 and thereafter, they were told, you think you are Germans. Not only are you not German, you are a Jude, a Jew by race, and that is inescapable. So that if you become like Edith Stein, not only a Catholic, but a nun, you will be murdered at Auschwitz as a Jew because you are racially Jewish, no matter what you think you are, and no matter how Catholic you think you might be. Zionists, of course, rejected this separation of ethnicity and religion. And they argued that the Jews are a nation. The Jews, as a nation, should have their own state. And that position was very popular among East European Jews, much more so than it was among West European Jews. American Jews seem to have sensed in the 19th century and certainly in the 20th that in the United States, ethnicity is not a good thing. We had a melting pot ideology. The Leninist equivalent would be slianya, fusion of everybody. No more Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Georgian, Armenian, Azerbaijani. Slianya, zbliżenie. First we have rapprochement, to translate zbliżenie into good English, rapprochement. Drawing together, right, through the mutual, I think, what was the word, обогащение, enrichment of languages, which meant, of course, that Russian infiltrated all other languages, but the other languages didn't infiltrate Russian. Это другое дело. And it also meant intermarriage. That's good. Ethnic intermarriage is good because it brings about understanding. Okay. In America, everybody was supposed to be a Yankee. So I don't know how familiar you are with it, but for example, name changing among American Jews was very prevalent. As a kid growing up in the Bronx, I rooted for the New York Knickerbockers basketball team. They had a player named Ron Sobieschik. Sobieschik, good Polish name, was too long to be put in the box scores of games. So Sobieschik became Sobi. Cohen became Cowan, etc., etc., etc. So the idea of assimilation, mutual assimilation, very close to the idea of slianya, meant that it was not a good idea for Jews to present themselves as an ethnic group. However, Americans are the most religious people in the Western world. Do sich por. If you look at the surveys, Americans are frum like nobody else in the Western world is. They may be lying, but 90 to 95% of Americans who are asked by the Gallup poll every year, do you believe in God, said, of course. 40% claim that they go to religious services, churches mostly, on a regular basis. Compare those figures to, say, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, on the one hand, or even Britain. In Great Britain today, 40% of people surveyed say they believe in God, and the number of people who attend religious services regularly is far, far lower. And that's the way secularism is very much on the upswing in the Western world. except for the United States. You've never heard a politician in the United States, even Senator Sanders, proclaim openly that they are atheists. That's a killer politically. Jews understood that they had to be churched. Because when a Jew or any other immigrant arrived in a new place in the United States, the first question was, how do you do? Where do you come from? Which church will you attend? The Baptist, the Methodist, the Catholic, the Presbyterian? I'll go to the synagogue. Oh, that's fine. As long as you're going to a religious house of worship. Therefore, the idea of Jewishness in the United States was established as a primarily religious identity. In 1955, a Jewish sociologist named Will Herberg wrote a book called Protestant Catholic Jew. Today he'd have to write Protestant Catholic Jew, Hindu, Muslim, to represent the religious configuration of the American population. American Jews are confused. They don't know what being Jewish means. I mean, they know in their hearts of hearts, but they can't explain it. So let's take the 1990 National Jewish Population Survey, which was the last decent survey. The 2000 was a disaster. What does it mean, the survey asked, to be a Jew in America? So, half of the people said it means to be a religious group. 57%, and these are not mutually exclusive. You could choose more than one. So half say it's religious, 57% say it's ethnic, 70% say it's a cultural group, and 42% say it's a nationality. What is a cultural group in America? Are Jews a cultural group? By European standards, that's ridiculous. Jews, ich red zu euch jetzt da auf Goyish. אני מדבר עליכם עכשיו בשפה לא יהודית. Я говорю теперь на нееврейском языке, да? Что это английский язык? Это еврейский язык? Конечно, нет. So what kind of cultural group are we? We don't even have our own language. Oh, we like bagels and lox? Azochen veitz, as our culture. Nationality. In English, in Anglo-Saxon, nationality means citizenship. It's not nationalnost. Nationalnost is ethnicity, and nationality is гражданство. So there's a confusion between the English and the Russian languages as to what a nationality actually is. Now, in the Soviet Union, and I don't have to tell you this, nationality, nationalnost, and I'm going to use the word nationality, though I should really be saying ethnicity, was acquired in one way only, through parentage. That's the only thing that mattered, biology. Place of residence doesn't matter. If an Evenk lives in Kazakhstan, he's still an Evenk. Personal preference, I'd like to be Azerbaijani. Sorry, both your parents were Armenian. You live in Nagorno-Karabakh? Too bad, exactly. The choice came only in one circumstance, when you had a parent of one nationality and of another nationality, and then you can choose. So Mamachka is Ukrainian, Papachka is Russian. You can choose between Russian and Ukrainian, but you cannot be Latvian. So either or. Now we know that the vast majority of Jews who had such a choice, until 1997 at least, chose to be non-Jews officially registered, because your life chances were much enhanced by being the non-Jew. Remember that in the Soviet Union, much more than in the United States, which claims to separate church and state, or I should say religion and the state, but doesn't really. Pick up a dollar bill, in God we trust. Chaplains in the army or the military and many, many other instances. But the Soviet Union was serious about separating religion and the state, and therefore religion was never registered officially or recognized. So, just follow the logic. In the Soviet situation, there would be no contradiction between being a Jew per nationality and, let's say, a Christian, Muslim, or Pravoslav by religion. An atheist could be a Jew, and a Jew could be an atheist. I had the opportunity to work with two Russian colleagues in the 1990s, at the beginning of the 90s and at the end of the 90s, and we did a survey in 3 cities in Russia and 8 cities in Ukraine. We talked to 6,600 people who, in one way or another, had a claim on being Jewish. And we asked them an open question. Can a Jew be a Christian? And the range of responses was very wide. Somebody from Odessa says, a Jew is a person who feels Jewish. If he crosses over to another religion, that means he no longer feels Jewish and doesn't want to be Jewish. So, Jana, I liked her very much. She moved from Moscow to Israel. She was very frank. She said, look, a Jew who is an atheist, that's normal. But to convert to another religion, this is a betrayal of your people. Now, when I quote this to American audiences, they're shocked. A Jew who's an atheist, this is normal. Not in America. A Jew who is an atheist keeps his mouth shut. Yeah. Then there are some people who made a very sophisticated difference between Yevrei and Yudei. A Jew by nationality, Yevrei, and a Jew by religion. And that's pretty logical in light of Soviet policy. What about Jews who convert to Christianity? Now, in America, until maybe 20 years ago, this was oive. This was a deep, dark secret in the family. 40% in Russia and Ukraine said, yes, that's not a good thing. But 60% said, I'm not in favor, I'm not against. At the Yevod Yellow. It's his business. A Zionist, Beitar, right-wing Zionist in St. Petersburg says, a Jew who practices a religion other than Judaism is not a bad Jew. It's his choice. If you want to believe in Jesus Christ, please, believe. Who forbids you to do so? Jews for Jesus, Messianic Jews, it's strange, but no strong feelings against it. Very different from the United States. So the dominant conception of being Jewish is that, among Russian-speaking people, is that it is biological and it's a matter of feeling. How you feel. I'd like to give you a flavor of that. 2/3 of our respondents said that to feel oneself a part of the Jewish people is what being Jewish is all about. To be proud of the Jewish people. To feel an inner kinship with Jews. To feel that we're one family. Some people put it very simply. I feel like one, and that's that. Я ощущаю таковым, и всё. An old lady in Ukraine said, молодой человек, she said to the interviewer, what are you bothering me for? Кто еврей, то знает, что он еврей, и всё. Whoever's Jewish knows it, and then stop with theories, religion, ethnicity, verdrängen it kein Kopf. Huh? Oh, you know it. Okay, famous United States Supreme Court Justice. So, for most Russian and Ukrainian Jews, and I assume Belarusian as well, sentiment and feeling, biology, descent, that is, parentage, have replaced faith, Jewish law, Jewish law, Jewish customs as the foundation of their self-conception. Let me get a little academic and a little theoretical for a moment. Ethnic groups are defined by cultural content and boundaries. That is to say, cultural content, we know what that is: language, foods, dress, customs, religion. Boundaries means who's in and who's out. Russian-speaking Jews by the 1990s had very little content left. No language, no religion. Yes, some customs, but not much. But boundaries existed. And the boundaries, until maybe 20, 30 years ago in the Jewish world as a whole, were two red lines in the sand. If you crossed over those two lines, you were out. The two lines were conversion to another religion and marriage to a non-Jewish person. Only one of those red lines remains. Marriage to a person of another religion is no big deal. Not in America, not in Russia, not in Ukraine, etc. And this is a drastic change. In 1926, the first Soviet census, 3% of Jewish marriages in Belarus, 5% in Ukraine were to non-Jews. In the RSFSR, it was different. And remember, the RSFSR was outside the Cherta Osiedlosti, outside the Pale of Settlement, which meant that there people were less attached to the korni, to the roots of Jewish life. And in 1926, 17% of Jewish women and 25% of Jewish men were married to non-Jews. This number, and I'm not going to go through the years, this number has changed drastically. In 1988, 70% of the Jews in Russia and Ukraine, and it differs from men and women, and it differs from Russia and Ukraine, but roughly 70% were marrying non-Jews, and that has increased. And the reason it's increased is that the so-called marriage market has shrunk. It's logical. Think about the emigration. 1.6 million Jews emigrate, right? Many of them are young, of marriageable age. They're gone. The statistical probability, therefore, of a Jew meeting and eventually marrying another Jew declines sharply. So we think today, for example, in Latvia, over 80%, 4 out of 5 marriages involving Jews are to non-Jews. Children. The 2002 Russian census recorded only 3,000 Jewish children under 5 years of age. That was a 79% decrease from 1989. Not only did the number under 5 years of age decline rapidly, but of these children, only 185 had two parents who were Jewish. In Russia, in the whole country, yes. In all of the Federatia, yes. So you have, again, 3,100 kids under 5, and in 2001, only 185 children born had two Jewish parents. There were many more who had one Jewish parent. So we have the question then of the demographic collapse. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. Collapse of Jewry in Russia, both because of low reproduction and tied to that because of the intermingling of Jewish and non-Jewish. Let's turn to Israel. In Israel, Jews assume that the word Israeli means being Jewish. They don't see that 1 out of every 5 Israelis is not Jewish. I'm talking about Arabs, citizens of Israel. not those who live in political limbo in the territories administered since 1967. But there's a basic problem and a basic logical and theological contradiction in Israeli public life. It's a political compromise which makes no sense. Here it is. In 1950, the Knesset, the Israeli legislature, passed the so-called Chok HaShvut, law of return, which essentially turned around the 1935 Nuremberg laws passed by the Nazis, Yimach Shema. The Nazis had a problem. If they were going to discriminate against and eventually murder Jews, they had to know who was a Jew and who was not. That problem arose as early as 1890 in Vienna, when the first anti-Semitic party arose, and the candidate for the mayorship of Vienna was a man named Karl Lueger, and he was asked, Herr Lueger, how are you going to determine who in Vienna is Jewish and is not? And he answered, Wer ist ein Jude, das bestimme ich. Who is a Jew? I decide. Okay? The Nazis decided that anyone who had a Jewish grandparent was sufficiently racially polluted that they deserved to be first isolated and then exterminated. The Israelis logically said, anyone who was persecuted because he or she was deemed to be Jewish should have the right to become an Israeli citizen automatically should they come to this land. Because what is the state of Israel? At least in one of its aspects, it is a haven for persecuted Jews. That was the Herzlian idea. Jews would have a safe haven. So, therefore, the law of return, which in Hebrew is called, as I said, Chok HaShvut, made the definition of Jewishness really the same as the Nazi definition. Ironically, here's a lesser irony. The Ottoman Empire, which ruled Palestine, Israel, and most of the Middle East until 1917, did not want to decide issues of religion and gave each religious community the right to administer marriage, divorce, and inheritance. Christians, Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, Maronite Christians, Jews, etc. The British, who took over from the Ottomans, continued that precedent. The Israelis in 1948 continued that precedent as well, establishing what's called in Israeli politics, in wonderful Tanakhic Hebrew, status quo in religion. Whatever was in 1948 is now, because if we start to mess around with religion, we're going to have endless fights, which we have anyway. That means that marriage and divorce are in the hands not of the state. There is no civil marriage, there is no civil divorce in Israel. It's in the hands of the religious authorities. In the Jewish case, of course, the hands of the rabbinate, which is only the Orthodox rabbinate is recognized. Okay, so here you have the situation. A person comes from the former Soviet Union. Under Chok HaShvut, he had a Jewish grandparent, may have a Jewish spouse, because there was an amendment to that law in 1970. He's immediately accepted as an Israeli. And he thinks he's an Israeli Jew, because he's certainly not an Arab. And then he comes to get married. He comes to get divorced. And the rabbinate says, Habibi, you may think you're Jewish, but sorry. And there is no civil marriage and divorce. Go to Cyprus. For some bizarre reason, a civil marriage done in Cyprus or a conservative or reform conversion done in America might work. Makes no theological, no logical sense, but that's the way it is so far. So we have these Chok hashvut niyeh yivrei. When I first heard that word in Moscow, I broke it. Chok hashvut niyeh yivrei. Что это такое? A Jew according to law of return. And we have Yivrei Pogalahu, according to halacha. And they can be completely contradictory. And we have tragedies. We have a soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces who dies in combat and can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery because according to halacha, he's not Jewish. Kak et stidna. How embarrassing. How uncomfortable. But it's the law. Okay, we have a solution. Convert to Judaism. What's the big deal? It is a big deal. Because the Israeli official rabbinate is increasingly Haredi, or what the Western media call ultra-Orthodox, and are not really interested in conversion, you have only between 2,000 and 3,000 Russian-speaking immigrants converting each year. And most of them convert when they do their military service, and those conversions are treated very skeptically by the rabbinate outside of the military. Now, if you do the math, if you have 340,000 non-Jews, let alone non-halachic Jews, and you're only converting 2,000 to 3,000 a year, then conversion is not going to be a very effective long-term solution. And I want to raise one other issue about Israel and then move on and conclude. We political scientists make a difference, somewhat artificial but useful for analytic purposes, between ethnic states and civic states. An ethnic state is a state which is created and operates on behalf of a particular nation. As Polish nationalists would say, Polska dla Polaków. Poland for the Poles. The fact that between 1918 and 1939, 1/3 of the population of Poland was not Polish, but Ukrainian, Belarusian, Jewish, German, and Lithuanian. They were Polish citizens, but they were not Polish ethnically. Jews had lived in Poland for 1,000 years, but they would never be Poles. They would always be Jews. And that was not discriminatory necessarily. It's just that this is the state of Poland for the Poles alone. Compare that, ironically, to the United States and the USSR. What makes us Americans? We don't have a common race. We don't have, originally, we didn't have common religions. We didn't have common languages. We are a civic nation because what we have in common is our allegiance, at least formal allegiance, to a set of political ideals, to the American Constitution. All right? That's what defines an American. What made a Soviet person? There were 160 different nationalities in 1926 census. There were maybe 110 in the 1989 census. What is a Soviet person? A Soviet person is a citizen of the Soviet state and therefore subscribes to the ideals of Marxism-Leninism. Whether he's a Buryat or an Azerbaijani or a Lithuanian or an Estonian, that's separate. Sovietskое гражданство. We are united. Союз нерушимый. Not so nyerushimi as it turned out, but okay, that was the belief. What's Israel? More and more, Israel is an ethnic state, which it was not supposed to be at the beginning, or at least not completely so. And you can see this, Israel has no constitution because they can't agree on who is a Jew and what is a Jewish state. So, ad biat HaMashiach, we defer this, which was probably a smart move. So the closest thing is the Declaration of Independence, which I want to quote. It is the self-evident right of the Jewish people to be a nation like all other nations, in its own sovereign state. We, the members of the National Council, representing the Jewish people in Palestine and the Zionist movement of the world, by virtue of the natural and historic right of the Jewish people and the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called Israel. And a few paragraphs later, we call upon the Arab inhabitants of the state of Israel to return to the ways of peace, play their part in the development of the state with full and equal citizenship and representation in all its bodies and institutions. Is it a Jewish state? What does it mean? Is it for Jews only and all others should leave? Is it a Jewish state because Jewish law, halakha, should prevail? Is it a Jewish state simply because the majority of the population, 70 to 75%, is Jewish? In 2014, Prime Minister Netanyahu fired Tzipi Livni and Yair Lapid as ministers, brought down the coalition, led to elections. The reason given was their refusal to back a Jewish state bill which would create a new basic law and thus be part of Israel's de facto constitution. In other words, it had to be proclaimed as a Jewish state. They thought, Livni, Lapid, and people in the center and the left, they thought that this was discriminatory against the Israeli Arab citizens, and it would privilege Israel's Jewish character over its democratic character. We have this discussion, some of it very enlightened, some of it very primitive, in Israel, about the tension between being a democracy and giving equal rights to all citizens, irrespective of origin, and being a Jewish state. Last Sunday, May 7th, the bill was approved in its first reading, and it went even further. It's going to establish Hebrew as Israel's sole official language, while granting Arabic a privileged status, making it lesser than Hebrew, but greater than other languages. All right, so Israel is still grappling with this issue. The issue of ethnicity and civic identity. The larger issue, therefore, is the nature of Israel. It's a very difficult problem because we don't agree on what being Jewish means, and therefore we cannot logically agree on what a Jewish state means. As Vladimir Ilyich said famously in 1902, "Что делать?" What should we do? Actually, he took the title from Chernyshevsky, Roman, terrible book, but in 1983, the reform movement in the United States took a very important step when it declared that Jewish identity could be determined by the father, provided that certain conditions were met. So now we have in the United States a completely disorganized Jewish community, a community that has no central direction, a community that has no central rabbinical authority, a community that has no Sanhedrin. Ish hayashar be'einav ya'aseh. Everyone does his own thing. That's the great American individuals. Don't tell me what to do. This is a free country. Right? We have chaos. Who is an American Jew is very unclear. 34 years after 1983, we have confusion and division among American Jews. The conservative movement, which always lags behind the reform movement by a couple of years or decades, recently announced that patrilineal Jews, which it doesn't accept, but they would be accepted to its summer camps for 1 year. And now it is announced that non-Jewish spouses of Jewish congregants will have full membership in their synagogues. So it's not inconceivable, at least to me, that in a few years the conservative movement will adopt the reform movement idea of patrilineal Jewishness. How can we solve these problems of boundaries? Who's in and who's out? I'm leaving aside cultural content. Boundaries. Well, we can keep the boundaries as they have been traditionally, and therefore we will exclude huge numbers of people, especially outside the United States, especially in bivshei Soyuz, we will exclude large numbers of people who say, I feel Jewish, I want to be Jewish. In fact, I am Jewish, and I don't care what you say. And they're very sincere. We can keep the rules of admission, which differ among Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Jews in the United States and vary from institution to institution in Israel, as they are. But we can promote more reasonable procedures of conversion so that the differences will be diminished. It's been tried in Israel to have a kind of a trans-denominational conversion institute. It hasn't worked. We can create a new category of Jews, and we have a biblical precedent for it. Gerim Toshavim, Ger Toshav, is a non-Jew who lives among Jews. Not halachically Jewish, but, I don't know, let's call it in American terms, an associate member. Associate member of the Jewish people. A civic member, a political member, not necessarily a religious member or a member of the religious body. We can also say, would be the most drastic one of all, let's drop all barriers. Whoever wants to be a Jew, feels that they are Jewish, пожалуйста. You're in. The problem is that every organization that I know of, golf clubs, universities, schools, has admissions criteria. You usually have to pay dues, nevach, even synagogues. If you drop criteria, look, I'm going to tell you a secret. Shut the television. I am the Queen of England. Yeah. I said so. I am the Queen of England, the Altitschke. She's 90 years old. I'm a little less, but I'm the Queen of England. Now, that's an absurd statement on the face of it. Anyone who says they're Jewish is going to be Jewish. Jews for Jesus? Messianic Jews? Hebrew Christians? So that is a very nice, open-sounding, liberal-sounding solution, but it would lead to obvious absurdities and create communal chaos. My last line is this. The Talmud sometimes has a debate which results in a solution that's called teku. Today, in modern Hebrew, teku means tie score. Hapoel 1, Maccabi 1, teku in soccer. Teku has been fancifully interpreted as being an acronym for Tishbi Yitaretz Kushiot Ve... What's the last word? I forgot. Eliyahu Hanavi, when he comes back, will solve all of these problems. Which means the debate will go on and on and on. But I think in this issue, this affects people's individual lives, and clearly in Israel, outside of Israel, in Russia and Israel and the United States, these issues affect our collective lives as well, and we would do well to ponder the issues and try as best we can to resolve them. Thanks for your attention.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.